think we are going to get started. I want to thank everybody for attending this particular breakout session of the Affordable Housing Conference of Montgomery County. I am Catherine Clay, and I am a board member of the Affordable Housing Conference of Montgomery County, and I am a community development professional with PNC Bank. I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing our panelists today that will be discussing everything Community Land Trust. I'll start with Tony Pickett. Tony Pickett will be the moderator for this session. And Tony is the Chief Executive Officer of Grounded Solutions Network, which is a national nonprofit organization with over 200 members. Working together with local community leaders, Grounded Solutions advances its mission to cultivate communities, equitable, inclusive, and rich in opportunity by implementing affordable housing solutions that last for generations. The organization aspires to develop 1 million homes in the next 10 years. Tony's more than 35 years of professional community development experience includes successful, permanently affordable shared equity housing development and thought leadership, promoting inclusive housing policies, and expanding the use of community land trusts for racial equity impact. He previously held senior roles in both Denver, Colorado, and Atlanta, Georgia. Next, we have Ginger Rumph. Ginger is the founding executive director of the Douglas Community Land Trust, which is a community-driven enterprise to help create a more inclusive and equitable District of Columbia by holding land in trust and leasing it for home ownership and rental housing, as well as small local businesses at reduced cost, safeguarding permanent affordability. Jennifer also serves as the executive director of City First Homes, the organization incubating the Douglas Community Land Trust. Throughout her career, Ginger has worked with a wide range of institutions and individuals to support affordable housing, workforce and business development, sustainable neighborhoods, engaged communities, and strong organizations. As Vice President and COO of the Coalition for Nonprofit Housing and Economic Development in the District of Columbia. Prior to CNHED, she worked for Enterprise Community Partners in Columbia, Maryland, as Director of Knowledge Building. She also held leadership positions in 2 Community Development Corporation coalitions, worked as an affordable housing real estate developer, and served in the Allegheny County Department of Economic Development. Ginger is also a former Peace Corps volunteer. Next, we have Garrick Good. Garrick is the Executive Director of Northeast Housing Initiative, Inc., NEHI, a permanently affordable housing developer in Baltimore, Maryland. He is an expert in affordable housing and real estate development with commercial and residential experience. Garrick has served as an advisor to federal and state governments and provides expert consultation to organizations like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. He retired in 2017 as president of Garrett R. Good and Company, which served as a government contractor and consultant for Fortune 500 companies on process involvement and business turnaround and total quality management. Garrett is a serial entrepreneur, having owned and sold over 6 businesses. Good has also worked with many nonprofits, advising them about fundraising strategies. Garrett has also consulted and provided diversity recruitment to BAE Systems, Caterpillar, Delta Airlines, and Goldman Sachs. And last but certainly not least, we have Ed Nusser. Ed is the Executive Director of City of Bridges Community Land Trust, located in Pittsburgh, where he also previously worked as Director of Real Estate. Ed also spent 6 years as the real estate and planning manager for the Lawrenceville Corporation, where he managed the development and implementation of the first community land trust in Western Pennsylvania, and was instrumental in efforts to build and grow the community land trust model in the region and across the state. He has worked for many years with partner organizations to advance housing justice, including the creation of the City of Pittsburgh's Affordable Housing Trust Fund and adoption of its inclusionary zoning overlay district in Lawrenceville. So without much further ado, I turn it over to Tony Pickett.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to all of the participants who are watching us today. And I also just want to acknowledge the Affordable Housing Conference of Montgomery County for giving us this opportunity today. This is really, for me, like the dream team panel, because each of the panelists and their organizations are members of our national network, highly successful and really sought after experts in the field. And even I myself, as a community land trust practitioner, am always learning from their experiences and the things that they are able to share about the work. To move this right along, I've asked each of our panelists to prepare a brief presentation of 5 minutes just to give you an overview of their organizations and the work that they do in preparation for our Q&A session. So I'm going to share my screen and Garrick will kick us off with the first presentation. And if each of the panelists will just give me a verbal cue, I'll move their slides along as we go.
Okay, thank you, Tony. To underscore what Tony said, we do appreciate the opportunity to talk about community land trusts and educating the affordable housing network on just the many opportunities that exist in providing home ownership for all families. The Northeast Housing Initiative, I am again and Garrick Good. I'm the executive director, and we can go to the next slide, Tony. The Northeast Housing Initiative was one of a few land trusts that was created after the enactment on May 20th, 2010 of the Affordable Housing Land Trust Act by Governor Martin O'Malley. That was actually followed up in the city of Baltimore with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which was founded in 2018 and funded in 2020. NEHI happens to be one of 6 organizations or community land trusts in the city of Baltimore that actually received benefits from that, which is about $7 million been put aside for community or for affordable housing, of which 20% of that goes towards community land trust. The first round of funding was completed or was awarded in April of this year. Again, we're one of 6. Our goal is, and what we're doing, is NEHI has a goal within the next 5 years to build 200 community land trust homes, a $30 million commitment in the city of Northeast Baltimore. We are currently in phase 3. We have 14 homes in our portfolio. And we also are looking for other projects that we do as well. Like we're looking at sustainable energy projects where we're working on a partnership in discussion now with Apple to build a community solar project. So not only will we be providing housing, we'll be looking at sustainable energy for those families or residents in our community. We're also looking at ways of supporting our families once they get into the community land trust through our stewardship program. Examples of our programming includes a tool lending library, also ongoing support programs to help families make sure that we meet them where they are, in getting ready and staying ready for the community land trust movement. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges that we've faced, like many other organizations amidst COVID, is one of the system things that have taken place is the minimum credit score for families to become eligible for mortgages through our lending partners changed from 620 to 680. Whereas that may be just a shift of a few paying down some balances for most folks, that can be a game changer for families that already are struggling to meet the minimum requirement that existed prior of 620. So we do work with them and see how we can actually make that happen as well. So that's our biggest challenge facing us today. Next slide, please. Some of the obstacles that we've had from the onset, I actually came into NEHI in its year 3. And we went from looking at how do we do this as one of the things that Senator McCray said, a few people wanting to do good, to actually putting together a business model that we could sustain. And we came up with a key process of, and 4 of the things in the 7 steps that we have our business model that we had obstacles was acquisition of really getting affordable housing stock that we could, and keeping the cost to a minimum, so we can keep the price down for the families that qualify. The cost of construction, working with putting together a team to do our construction work where they can still make money, but also we can still make it affordable for our families. And what our end result with that is we actually pulled our construction in-house. And so we now provide construction ourselves in building our homes. And then proper credit facilities. One of the things about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and many of the other funders, as I'm sure most of you know, is everyone wants to be the last money in. They want proof of concept. So we had to put together some credit facilities to be able to do our business on a day-to-day basis. And Tony was very helpful with helping us get some of those facilities put together with our relationship and partnership with Grounded Solutions to look at how to do it and how to do it differently and create a model that could be sustainable as we move forward. And then last but certainly not least is our stewardship program, where we look at constantly surveying our families to see what their needs are and how we tweak our program to meet their fundamental needs as they change day to day. We have everything from seniors to unwed mothers that are just starting out that have housing needs. But our fundamental belief is that everybody deserves housing, and we feel like that housing is a cornerstone to having a happy, safe family, regardless of where you are in the spectrum. Next slide, please. And the opportunities. The biggest opportunities, which I could go on all day long about what opportunities look like for us, but the one thing that keeps me coming in each day is the smile on the faces of, I'll say Miss Marion, for example, who I met with last week. She was a 67-year-old female who has raised 3 children. And she said, I'm going to be a homeowner. And she said she worked for the public library system for years and never believed that she could be a homeowner. So at 67, she comes in tomorrow for one of her final training courses to be able to go through the approval process to become a homeowner. And hopefully within the next 45 days, she will be a homeowner. And so whether it's a Miss Marion or whether it's the another mother that we're working with that we're doing as one of our first homeowners, we're doing a housewarming for, those opportunities, one family at a time. Our mission is building community one home at a time. And we are certainly doing it one home at a time, but just the impact that we see on a day-to-day basis that this makes of getting families that did not believe they could be homeowners to become homeowners is one of the most invigorating things and things that makes the job worthwhile in doing. And so that concludes my presentation about Northeast Housing Initiative. And I'll turn it back to you, Tony.
Thank you, Garrick, for that great picture of CLT success in Baltimore. And next up, we're going to have Ginger Rumph share a little bit about Community Land Trust project progress in the District of Columbia.
All right, great. Thank you. Thanks, Tony, and thank you, Catherine, and the Affordable Housing Conference of Montgomery County. We're just thrilled to be here and be on a panel with these folks. Also, you know, being Ed from my old hometown, Pittsburgh, and my new hometown. I've been here for long enough to call the Douglas Commonwealth my hometown. Very grateful for all the learning that happens across the network, Grounded Solutions and beyond. Douglas Community Land Trust, just jumping right into it, is was formed in order to deal with racial and economic equity concerns and concerns around displacement. And if you want to jump to the next slide there, came out of conversations that were taking place around the 11th Street Bridge Park, and they were forming an equitable development plan. For those of you who are not familiar, the 11th Street Bridge Park is an actual connection between the east and west sides of Douglas Commonwealth. And yes, I'm going to keep on using that, 51st state. The eastern part, the east of the Anacostia communities, Ward 7 and 8, had been historically disinvested and have dramatically different property values and access to amenities than do other parts of DC. So this bridge was a notion to be able to connect the two. But at the same time, the folks who were doing this said, we have to be cognizant of potential displacements. And so we're developing a plan to deal with that. And out of those hundreds of conversations with residents, one of the ideas that surged was, what about a community land trust? This came out from residents talking about potential solutions. And so the idea was formed. 11th Street Bridge Park, along with partner City First Homes, facilitated a group of about 15 residents to start to think about how could they get this off the ground, and really started thinking about governance concerns. And you can flip over to the next slide there, Tony. And we're thinking about ways to help people be able to stay, both residential and small businesses, specifically around the 11th Street Bridge Park. But as more conversations were taking place, it was obvious that there was a need across the entire DC. And so the notion was to create a land trust. It originally focused on the Anacostia and east of the river communities, but to serve across DC. And this is based on some best practices around reaching scale and sustainability. And I know we'll touch on that a little bit later in our conversation. But as you can see, a quick little timeline. So the conversation's taking place over a number of years, thinking through the governance structure, who should be involved, what kind of land trust. Is this gonna be a traditional land trust, or is it gonna be closely held? And I saw a quick question come into the chat about, what about some other ones? Maybe we can touch base on that. There are land trusts that are really, really focused on unit production, and there are others that are really, really focused on community participation. And I think a lot of folks across the CLT spectrum try to do both. And Douglas Community Land Trust is certainly one of those that is trying to focus on both community engagement and real community control. And I'll flip back over to the timeline, but we can, rolling forward for the sake of time here, that notion of having community control is one that is of utmost importance to the Douglas CLT Board of Directors. So this group, if you scroll forward there, Tony, you'll see our incredible Board of Directors. It's a traditional tripartite board, which means that it's about a third lessee representatives, 1/3 general, and 1/3 public representatives. And these are folks that are from the community. They are, and they have, for the majority of them, have been with the development of the CLT since the beginning. They moved from being an advisory into a board of directors. And right before we actually, I'm at the end of my time here. We moved, sorry, now I need to figure out how to turn off my timer. Just to wrap up really quickly, we moved from incorporating, from governance, figuring out all of those questions that I laid out, to incorporating in September of 2019. We waited about a year to get nonprofit status. We actually received that nonprofit status in September of last year. And if we scroll forward another one, And another one that's just telling you a little bit about the property types were both residential and commercial. Really decided to take a solid stand on pay it forward, right? So this is about preservation of properties, not just for the current folks, but for the future. And that was super important to everybody who was in the development of this. And scrolling forward again, we can see a little bit about where we are now. Of course, we've been able to incorporate, yes, we now have 219 units in the portfolio. Trying to get to scale quickly, part of that was because of a transfer of properties that came over from City First Homes. And just to correct a little something in the bio, I'm no longer the director of City First Homes. Now that we are established as an independent organization, I transitioned over and am happy to represent the group of folks that you saw on the previous slide as the board of directors. I can talk a little bit more later about some of the stewardship that we have been undertaking. And if you just scroll to the next slide, I mean, I think this is a thing that I really want to leave folks with is the engagement piece and talking about the critical importance of engagement and community decision-making and power as a necessary equation in achieving racial and economic equity. We can talk all day about the number of units that get produced for the benefit of African American, Black and Brown, very low income residents. But at the end of the day, equity has to also mean power and decision-making with and by the very people who traditionally in the community development field are thought of as beneficiaries. So with that, I will end.
Thank you, Ginger. And next up, Ed is going to give us an overview of CLT activity in Pittsburgh.
Thanks, Tony. And yeah, boy, gosh, if I could just give my 5 minutes to echo everything that Garrick and Ginger said, I think we'd be okay. Yeah, so I'm Ed. I'm the executive director at City of Bridges Community Land Trust. We're located in Pittsburgh. We serve the city of Pittsburgh and a handful of first-ring suburban communities in Allegheny County, which is the county that Pittsburgh's located in. So given that, I'm speaking to a conference in Montgomery County, Maryland, I wanted to provide a little bit of context, both about City of Bridges, who we are, what we do, how we do it, but also about the city of Pittsburgh and the on-the-ground realities that we're facing now in our city. So City of Bridges is just about 2 years old. We are a regional nonprofit community land trust, and we exist to build community ownership, to preserve permanent affordability, empower individuals, and ensure responsible growth and stewardship. We grew out of an existing CDC called the Lawrenceville Corporation, which serves the neighborhood of Lawrenceville in the city of Pittsburgh. In 2019, we spun off to become an independent nonprofit organization, followed Ginger's timeline with the same thing of in May of 2019, our founding board of directors met for the first time. In August of 19, we had bylaws and articles of incorporation drafted and filed. And on December 22nd of 19, we got our 501c3 letter from the IRS, which still might be my favorite Christmas present I've ever got. But as a CLT, we believe in indirect democracy. We believe in community control. So we're a membership organization. Our members elect my 12 bosses every year. And in traditional CLT fashion, our board follows a tripartite model, just like Ginger outlined, with a third reserved for folks that live in our homes, a third reserved for community representatives, and a third for practitioners or individuals with a personal or professional experience that's going to help us fulfill our mission. Right now, we have 21 affordable homes in our portfolio and plans to break ground on 18 more before the end of this year. So that's who we are at City of Bridges. I wanted to provide some context about on-the-ground realities in Pittsburgh. And Tony, you can advance the slide now. This is my Chicken Little slide. The sky is falling on us. For folks who may be vaguely aware of Pittsburgh's story, we're a Rust Belt city. We don't see this kind of market growth. Our population's been shrinking for 70 years. historic disinvestment, the lingering effects of urban renewal and redlining, the compounding effects of blight, vacancy, environmental injustice in a former industrial city. That's our story. Trying to cope with this level of market growth is not what we know how to do in Pittsburgh. And so this graph here, the red line in the middle is what an 80% AMI family could reasonably expect to afford when they went to purchase a single family house at any point over the last decade. The colored lines, other than the red one, are a handful of the neighborhoods that we're working with. The purple one is where we got our start in Lawrenceville. Median sale price has more than tripled in just a decade, which is comparatively now glacially slow compared to what we're seeing in other neighborhoods. The blue line of Polish Hill saw a median of $90,000 just 4 years ago. Last year it was pushing 300. And then Garfield, a historically Black neighborhood, a historically red line neighborhood, their median sale price has doubled in just 2 years, from $100,000 in 2018 to $202,000 last year. And when you look at the rapid rise of home prices through a lens of racial equity and through the intersections of economic injustice, well, our problems go from bad to worse in Pittsburgh. And you can go to the next slide, Tony. In 2019, the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh and the University of Pittsburgh produced and published what they called Pittsburgh's Gender Equity Report. And you see the pull quote in red from the lead researcher. And what the report found across any number of indicators of health, housing, education, employment, income outcomes, simply by leaving Pittsburgh, Black Pittsburghers would be better off. What this means is if Black residents got up and left our city today and moved to the majority of any other city in the US, they would be in a better position. Life expectancy would go up, income, educational opportunities, employment would all improve simply by leaving Pittsburgh. And so when you have that reality and the story of Black Pittsburgh and white Pittsburgh being so divergent, and you layer on top of that real estate and market growth that no one's ever seen in the last 70 years in our city, we're really at an inflection point. And you see below the income from the same study of the median income for full-time workers in the city of Pittsburgh for white Pittsburghers and Black Pittsburghers. And those numbers tell the story by themselves. And so again, you see rapid appreciation. You see homes that are now going for $200,000. If a median single Black mother who's making $33,000 a year is not going to buy a house for $200,000. And so the push for affordability, which used to be a concern in 3 or 4 neighborhoods of our city, is now a regional problem and is now finally getting the attention it needs as a regional problem. So you can go to the last slide, Tony. And I don't want to end, I don't want to just rain on bad news about our city and my city and where we are. So this is where we come in as City of Bridges. And this is why we do the work that we do. So we've developed 14 homes to date. We do direct real estate development. As I said, so all those 14 homes have gone to first-time low-income homeowners. 5 of the 14 are owned by people of color. We have 18 more homes planned for groundbreak this year. We also offer a buyer-initiated program, which is a flexible down payment and closing cost assistance grant that can be used to sort of close the gap between what a first-time low-income home buyer can afford and what a house costs on the market. So, for just ease of comparison, if a person is shopping, they're pre-qualified for a mortgage at $125,000. They see a house they love that's $150,000. Our grant program can cover that gap. And in exchange for that $25,000 down payment support, they agree to bring the house into the land trust and have it remain permanently affordable, which we'll get into challenges later. But the idea of being able to buy and create a permanently affordable home for $25,000 or $35,000 is huge compared to the cost of subsidy that is needed for construction. And then lastly, and this has been an adaptation of ours over the last 8 months, really over the, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we've pivoted to get involved in specifically anti-displacement acquisition work. So we've acquired 8 of the naturally occurring affordable housing, which I still don't like that term, but it's what we use. So I use the air quotes to be a bit more of a cynic about it. But we've acquired 8 units occupied by long-term, low-income tenants in 3 different neighborhoods. These were units that would have transacted on the market, tenants that are on month-to-month leases and would have been told, you have a new landlord, you have 30 days to get out, we'll see you later. But thanks to our intervention, thanks to the work and support of the folks that invest in our work, we've been able to stabilize those 8 tenants, keep them in place, and guarantee that they have safe, stable housing throughout the course of this pandemic and what comes next. And so with that, I'll hand it back to Tony.
Thank you all for those enlightening presentations. And before we sort of jump into some Q&A, which I'll initiate with some questions I've prepared for the panelists, and then allow the audience, if you post your questions in the chat, we'll get to some of those in our time together as well. I'm going to use a little bit of moderator's prerogative and maybe like just step back for a minute and say to folks, if you're not familiar with the community land trust model, Ginger actually had a slide in her presentation that we went through very quickly, but the typical approach of a community land trust is to separate ownership of the land from the housing, the structures themselves. And that land is communally owned and stewarded by the nonprofit community land trust organization. And most typically, in the case of home ownership, the homes are sold with a resale price restriction and what we call a resale formula that limits the owner's ability to access the full equity that builds up in the property over time should they decide to sell. And we'll have some questions around some of that mechanism, but I just want to put that out there for folks. And also, I just want to say each of our panelists touched on the concept of racial equity in their presentations. And I like to be clear in sharing with folks that racial equity, in my view, is built into the DNA of community land trust organizations. And the reason for that is the actual origin of the model itself. It came out of the civil rights movement in the late 1960s in rural Albany, Georgia. Several civil rights leaders, including 2 cousins of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., really had this vision for a new form of land tenure, and they were able to put together the very first community land trust in the United States there in Albany in 1969. It's called New Communities. And so the reason they did that was in organizing folks in that rural community to vote, they found that families who were farming families, so they lived on their farms, and most often they were tenant farmers. So the land was actually owned by a white landowner. And what often happened, and you can imagine this happening, if they went out and registered to vote or exercised their right to vote, they were essentially evicted from their homes and farms. And so the civil rights leaders saw that pattern happening over and over again and came up with the community land trust as a way to stabilize those families, to give them authority and decision-making power, just as Ginger referred to it, over their own lives in terms of their homes and farms. And so over the years, that model has evolved to really focus on permanently affordable home ownership for the most part, but again, a whole range of uses can be put on community land trust property, and we see that happening with our members across the country. So I just wanted to share that for a little bit more grounding before we got to some questions. And I'm going to start off by giving each of the panelists a brief opportunity to answer some questions that I think will be helpful in illuminating further what's happening on the ground. First, and I'll start with you, Ed, what are you most excited about for your organization to accomplish this year?
Boy, so that's a fun question to ask, because as of Tuesday, we have a new mayor-elect in our city. For the first time since 1930, an incumbent mayor of the city of Pittsburgh lost an election. And so we have a young, well, relatively young for Pittsburgh, African-American state rep who's going to be our first Black mayor in our city, who ran on a platform of affordable housing and inclusionary zoning and community control. I'm incredibly excited to see what that administration does for the city writ large. From the organizational level, I'm also really excited. We just last week closed on a property that landlord told a tenant, here's a 30-day notice. You've got to get out. I'm selling, put the house on the market. I want you out before I list it. She said, well, hey, can I buy it from you instead? She wasn't going to be able to get a mortgage in 30 days to buy from the landlord. She had credit issues. She had to do credit repair work. She called us. We were able to close on that property last week. We closed on it. She's going to remain a tenant for the next 3 months while we work on a seller finance transaction to allow her to become an owner of this house that she's lived in for the last 3 years. Her mortgage payment is going to be less than what her rent is by about $400. So I'm incredibly excited to pilot that. As you get into this idea of seller financed and sort of you work around some of the systemic barriers that exist in lending. If you're talking about credit issues and you're talking about down payment issues, it's going to take years for people to do that work. And that's because of the systems that are put in place. And so if we can pilot this and show there's a workaround to get people into ownership and then work with the lender when they're ready, I'm really excited about that.
Fantastic. Ginger, what are you excited about for the Douglas Community Land Trust?
Oh my goodness. I'm excited to actually be able to see people again. So talk about being a new organization and trying to do community engagement via Zoom. That's it's tough across the board. It's been tough for so many people for so many different things, but I think given the nature of the type of CLT that we are, it's just so important to have those contacts. And we've been trying to do as much as we can. We actually pivoted last year to doing a lot more pandemic relief and resource connection, whether that is from food, grocery delivery. We actually were able to connect with an organization to provide cash transfer payments to all 47 households that were living in our first rental unit. So grateful for that partnership with Thrive that was put together with 4 nonprofits in DC. Going forward, I think the biggest thing that happened to us was just under a month ago, we were part of a development team that was awarded a parcel in Truxton Circle of DC, which is an incredibly expensive place. Everywhere is, but and the mayor put out a press release about the partnership with the CLT, and that was fantastic because honestly, if there's one thing to make CLT successful is that municipal partnership. It is about, of course, it's about money. Of course it is, because you cannot do this work without subsidy. But it is also about, I hate to use this phrase, but being a thought partner, being an actual intentional partner in setting up infrastructure that is going to work long term and making policies that go along and can amplify and quite frankly undo some of the racist devastation that has taken place in our communities over the past, decades and decades and decades.
Thank you, Ginger. And finally, Garrick.
What I'm most excited about, I think the work that we're doing in one specific community, we've seen 3 major players come together and come to us to say, oh, you've done this in this community, how can we all work together? And it's players that like Habitat and St. Ambrose, or 2 of them, are saying, how do we sit down at the table and look at how we make the biggest impact in this community by pulling our resources together to make the best community possible in this one area that we're working on. And also we've been able to, through the stewardship program, look at not only home ownership, but what are the other factors that are keeping this community from thriving, like security, like trash. There are just a number of things we've been able to do through the residents to be able to say, how do we do this? But just seeing 3 people who have traditionally siloed themselves to say, how do we work together to best serve the city of Baltimore best in meeting the housing needs of the families has been really exciting for us as an organization, as well as for us being hopeful for moving forward.
Thank you for that, Garrick. And I'm gonna move along, and again, I want to sort of emphasize this theme of racial equity. And so my next question is for each of the panelists to tell us how their organizations define racial equity, and what do you most want to share with the participants and have them understand about how your work contributes to it. And we'll start with Ginger this time.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I appreciate you setting the stage with that, Tony. I think the idea of folks not having a shared definition or shared understanding of what that looks like is problematic in us coming up with solutions. And for our board and our broader membership, we've been pretty clear, as hopefully you've heard me express, that it is not just about the outcome, but it is also about the process, and perhaps the process even more so. Having folks, and look, I say this as though it is not obvious. I am a white woman representing communities that are predominantly of color, and certainly those that would be benefiting from, just given the structural racism, what has occurred in the DC over time. The fact is, my role in the CLT is one of facilitating and carrying forward what the board of directors and the membership wants to see happen. And we take that very seriously. Now, we are new, we are still building out what that looks like, what the infrastructure looks like. Some of my board members say, we're flying while we're building. And I think we've been fairly successful at doing that. But the fact is, we are, in fact, after this is over, I've got another interview. We're hiring for a dedicated position around community engagement and communications, because that's just, and you can hear me just really talking about this idea of equity. And I think it ties back in, hopefully we'll get around to this part as well, what it means in terms of the resale formula and the sharing. When we talk about the distance in the wealth gap between white and Black, or white and people of color across the board, how that impacts our own view of equity. I'll leave it for my other panel.
Thanks, Ginger. Yes, and let's put a pin in that wealth creation question, because I do want to ask you all about that. But Garrick, why don't you tell us about your organization's definition of racial equity?
Our definition of racial equity, underscoring what Ginger said, has been just fundamentally making sure that the beneficiaries are at the table every step of the way. So for example, with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we had beneficiaries collecting signatures to get it put on the ballot and going through that whole process. But when we started talking about how we were going to spend the money or allocate it, there were no beneficiaries in the room. And I was like, how can we possibly not have them included? This is the most important thing. They've done all the work to make their case known. We call it the People's Fund. We need to have all the people available at the table, because they are the #1 beneficiaries of this, of this record monumental effort and lift that took place. So that's our biggest piece, is just beyond the tripartite board, which Ginger talked about and Ed mentioned, It's just having them available and at the table every step of the way.
Thanks, Garrick. Ed, any additional thoughts you want to add from your organizational perspective?
I think I just want to, quickly add that one of the things that we talk about with my board and executive committee and our communities that we serve is, from our view, we never get to hang a mission accomplished banner on our work for racial equity. So there's this tension that we are doing some things well, but we need to always be better. We can never have too many people included in the conversation. We can never have too many voices at the table. We can never have, too much outreach to prospective buyers. So we try to take a holistic look at it in terms of, the beneficiaries, in terms of who's getting the houses, but also who's getting the contracts to build the houses, in terms of, who's having the opportunity to bid on all of the different things that go into creating one affordable house, and who's getting the economic benefit that ripples out from creating these 4 houses. But Garrick and Ginger covered so much, so I'll leave it with that.
Thanks, Ed. I want to again sort of use my prerogative, and I see a question in the chat from one of the audience members, and it asks, do we have an estimate for the number, trends, and sustainability of CLTs, and how many are on the forefront of racial equity? And I just want to share that in 2019, Grounded Solutions partnered with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and released what we consider to be a groundbreaking report. It was on the performance of shared equity housing programs, and CLTs are a form of shared equity housing. There are other models like limited equity co-ops, resident-owned communities, and deed-restricted programs as well, that all contribute to protecting the affordability of homeownership long-term. That study looked at data over a 33-year period for about 4,000 community land trust homes that were scattered across the country. That was just a sample. There are approximately 255,000 shared equity homes across the United States today. CLTs make up a small portion of that number at about 12,000 units, but again, small but preserving affordability over time. So multiple families are benefiting from those homes. One of the things that really came to light in that study is that, and I will also say the largest portion of that 4,000 unit sample are CLT homes. So we really consider the outcomes to be synonymous with CLT outcomes. And one thing I want to just highlight from that study is that CLTs are increasingly serving families of color. In 2018, the benchmark for that was 43% of that same 4,000 unit sample were serving families of color. The other thing that you should note about that is that a majority of those folks, all of them in fact, are first-time homeowners who are buying those homes. So we're benefiting folks with access to homeownership, the American dream, who otherwise would not be able to attain that stability for their families. And so I would say, again, as Catherine shared in her introduction, Grounded Solutions has challenged our entire 200-member network to really push over the next 10 years to expand that 255,000 unit number to be 1 million units with lasting affordability. And we're going to use a variety of means and methods to achieve that, but we're using a racial equity lens. We are looking at where those units are happening, which organizations are producing them, and even who is actually, again, having a say in the decision-making around those organizations. We're also working at Grounded Solutions on the policy side We have a bill in Congress right now. It's called the Restoring Communities Left Behind Act. If we're successful in getting that passed and part of the infrastructure bill, so I just want to give a shout out for that, because our members are advocating with their representatives in the House right now to get them to pass that bill. And if it passes in the Senate and then becomes part of the infrastructure package, it would make available $5 billion a year for the next 10 years. And that's not all going to community land trusts, but community land trusts and shared equity programs are specifically called out as an eligible use for those funds. So that would open up possibilities that we cannot possibly imagine. It's been a long sought for goal to increase the scale of community land trusts and other forms of shared equity. And so we're really at a pivotal point in likely being able to do that. So I'll stop pontificating about all that. I just wanted to kind of lob that in and respond to the question from our audience. And I want to, again, I put a pin in the wealth creation issue, and I want to ask our panelists in our remaining time to kind of offer some opinions about that. The question really is, how do you explain the limited wealth creation offered by community land trusts to homeowners who may view it as just another form of inequality, not giving them access to full wealth creation that market rate homeownership offers? And first, Ed, I want to give you first crack at that.
I'm going to do my best to be brief on this. I've got 8 different ways I can go depending on who I'm talking to. What we talk about a lot at City of Bridges, because of the context of rapid price escalation in so many neighborhoods, is this idea of wealth creation versus wealth extraction. And at the end of the day, wealth that you are making by, say, selling your house for $100,000 more than you paid for it, I'm sure that on average, folks have made upgrades, they've maintained their homes, they've done investment in their homes. But a lot of that money is really wealth being extracted from a community. It's not about, no individual. I use the example of one neighborhood, Lawrenceville, where I used to work, that saw a 65% reduction in crime, a growing commercial district, 300 new street trees were planted. No individual property owner did that, but they all get to reap the benefits of it. And so we need to reorient ourselves to this idea of community created wealth that should never be extracted, and individual created wealth that should be returned and can be returned to individuals. So I talk about that. And then also in Pittsburgh, given the black-white gap that we talked about in income, we're really honest of, if you're looking at wealth at home ownership as a way to make a bunch of money and sell your house for a lot of money, if a person of color is doing that, the odds are good they're selling their house to someone who looks like me. And so what that means for community stability from an anti-displacement lens is really troubling, right? Because if you look at this purely as a race to the top and as a race to sell for the highest price, you're encouraging the rapid change of a neighborhood and the rapid change of a community. And so again, going back to community stability and access to place across generations, that does work, that comes to loggerheads at times. And so, we use the same language that Ginger does about this being a pay it forward model, that you're investing in access for generations yet to come.
Really transformative thinking there seems to be part of that solution, Ed. Garrick, how about your take on this?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is the Miss Marion example I gave, where we have someone she's been renting for 30 years, paying over $1,000 a month, and the property she lived in was substandard. And she's been able to capture a new home that's totally renovated, and she's able to do it for less than half of what she was paying for the last 30 years. and it'll be something that she will have ownership of, and something that she will have to be able to pass on to her daughters. As to quote her, I have something I can leave my daughters. And so that's not only wealth creation, and that she's getting an asset, but she also has money that she can put back into the community in so many different ways, changing her quality of life, as well as the way she's able to live on a day-to-day basis. So that's some immediate wealth creation for her, and that she's got more money to spend, both in the community as well as to do other things that she enjoys doing.
And so, Ginger, why don't you round out?
Yeah, I love how you guys talk about this. I'm taking notes to make sure to add to my bank of explanations. Well, look, the first thing is we don't hear that argument from people with whom we're talking who might want to purchase the house. That argument around why don't you return 100% back to the low income prospective owner at that point is made by folks in the field, is made by policy people in the circles where we're talking. People have choice to participate or not participate. And frankly, what we tell people is, given the fact that we are operating in this capitalist system where we are commodifying housing, and we can have debates on whether that is an appropriate thing to be doing in our society, but we're operating in that structure right now. You have a choice to participate or not. If you can get a home at market value and get 100% returned, do that. If you cannot, and this is the way that you can stay, whether through purchase of a house or maybe it's a CLT rental, and this is the way that allows you to stay in the community because you've been here, you have a tremendous attachment here, you should be able to do that. And we want to help to create the system that enables you to do that. And I think that just one of the other ways that we talk about this is kind of the economic value of a home versus the use value, right? So anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And since we're nearing the end of our time, I just want to add a little bit of a sort of addition to the responses there. And thank you, Ginger, for posting a link to the Lincoln study in the chat if folks want to look at that. Another outcome from that study, we looked at this wealth creation question. I can tell you that across that 33-year span for those roughly 4,000 homes, what we found was the median investment a low moderate income family made in purchasing their shared equity home was about $1,800. The average tenure of their sort of span of living in the home before they decided to sell at their option was about 5 to 7 years. The yield to them at the end of that time period was a median of $14,000. So 1,800 in, 14,000 out, 5 to 7 years. 60% of those folks who sold went on to purchase a traditional market rate home. So it's the stepping stone, the economic catalyst that brings people who otherwise would not be able to be homeowners into the full benefits of market rate home ownership. So we see that happening over and over again. Our time is up. And again, I want to thank our hosts for this opportunity today, each of the panelists, and all of you in the audience. Again, reach out to us at Grounded Solutions. We'd love to find a way to continue this conversation about a regional approach to shared equity and affordable housing that stretches from Pittsburgh to Baltimore to DC. So hope you all have a great weekend. That's it for us. Bye-bye.